Welcome. Today I am going to discuss Somali culture in Minnesota. I chose to study the Somali community for this assignment because even though they are a small portion of the population, in Minnesota they are heavily scrutinized and seen as outsiders, and lately have been singled out. Unfortunately, the Somali community have many of the risk factors for developing substance use disorder. They are also regularly discriminated against by white and black communities. Lastly, the stigma around substance use disorder in their community creates significant barriers to seeking and getting treatment. Let's start by talking about the Somali population in Minnesota. First of all, after migrating to the United States, many Somalia went from major city to major city, and many of the people I interviewed, as well as the ones in the documentaries, I have found about substance use disorder in the Somali communities, reported moving back and forth from many major cities, but Minnesota has the largest population of Somali immigrants in the United States. This is attributed to the idea of massive mora. I'm sure I said that wrong, but you get the idea. This idea refers to generosity being a core value of Somali culture that extends beyond one's immediate clan or family towards the broader community and public. Somalis find dignity in being helpful, and Minnesota is a very helpful, generous place to live and be a member of the greater community. Here we have a graph that shows the explosive growth of the Somali population in Minnesota over the past 35 years. As we can see, the number of migrants from Somalia when combined with the second generation has gone from basically zero to 76,000. And over half of them are born here and under 35 years old. Of course, this is still a tiny fraction of the entire population of Minnesota. This leaves this community very vulnerable to all the kinds of discrimination and stereotyping that comes along with being such a small minority. The overwhelming majority of Somali immigrants live in the metro area, with only 22% living in greater Minnesota. Most Somali are Sunni Muslims. Religion has a much more comprehensive role in life than is typical in the Americas or Western Europe. This means that sensitivity to the Muslim faith is very important when counseling Somali. Somalia is a land of clans, and there is a strong sense of loyalty to your own clan, especially after the extended civil war. And maintaining the reputation of your clan is very important, and shame is a very powerful thing in this community. This can be a benefit and a hindrance, as we see in a minute. As we get into the factors that lead to substance use disorder in the Somali community, I think we first need to understand where this group of people came from and what they have been through. Alright, so here's a brief history of Somalia. If you'd like something more entertaining, I'd suggest the YouTube video, but I can't get it to work. So here we go. In 91, the Somali state effectively ceased to exist when dictator Sierra Bar was overthrown after 25 years in power. Rather than uniting, rival clan-based factions immediately turned on each other, and the central government dissolved, and the country fragmented into warlord-controlled territories. So in 1992-93, the Civil War triggered a catastrophic famine, killing at least an estimated 300,000 people. The UN and U.S. intervened in Operation Restore Hope to protect aid deliveries. The mission quickly escalated into conflict with warlord Mohammed Fard Ayed, culminating in the 93 Battle of Mogadishu, which we all know from Black Hawk Down, in which 18 American soldiers were killed. The U.S. withdrew shortly after that. In 1995 to 2006, with international forces gone, Somalia descended into a patchwork of competing militias. There was no functional national government. Remarkably, the economy didn't entirely collapse. Informal systems, the diaspora, and clan networks kept some semblance of life together. In 2006, however, a coalition of Islamic courts briefly unified much of the South, bringing in a degree of order to Mogadishu for the first time in 15 years. Ethiopia, not wanting a hostile Islamist neighbor, invaded and ousted them within months. Of course, the United States helped with that. Al-Shabaab, the more radical elements of the Islamic courts, regrouped as Al-Shabaab, an Islamic militant group that pledged allegiance to Al-Qaeda. They launched a brutal insurgency, controlling large swaths of the territory and carrying out mass casualty attacks across the region, including deadly bombings in Uganda and Kenya. In 2011, a severe drought combined with ongoing conflict caused another major famine, killing over 250,000 people, roughly half of them children under 5. So we can see that people coming from Somalia come from a history of famine and war. ACEs refer to factors that make you more likely to develop many chronic health conditions, including substance use disorders. As you can see from this chart, the likelihood of a Somali refugee being vulnerable to SUD is greater than most of the population. Just think about how many of these factors existed for these refugees. In fact, both of my interviewees both reported sexual and physical abuse. One of them was a second-generation immigrant, but the first one came to the United States when she was 7 and witnessed some of the war and was abused before she came to the United States. Somalis were brought to the United States after the Ethiopian War brought them with baggage in the form of trauma, whether they were adults or children. Everyone over the age of 10, when the war broke out, only experienced horrifying terror. All of that was incubated in them. When they arrived here, they were still just the children of immigrants, a child who must adjust to a new environment. So all that pain, they did not leave it in Somalia, they brought it with them. This is a quote from Asmi Ismail. I feel like this is a powerful example of the kinds of trauma that the Somali people brought with them. And this is a large part of the trauma that counts towards the ACEs. Among the strongest predictors of poverty are low education and lack of English language ability. Table 1 shows that Somali immigrants experience both problems at dramatically higher rates than native Minnesotans. Virtually all native Minnesotans speak English very well, for example, but 58% of working-age Somalis do not. Meanwhile, 39% of working-age Somalis have no high school diploma compared to just 5% of natives. As you can see, poverty runs deep in the Somali community. Why are Somali refugee experiences so important? 1, the likelihood is very high that they have fled a civil war, experienced hunger and abuse. This means first-generation refugees have higher rates of anxiety and PTSD. Unfortunately, these conditions are often handed down through abuse or neglect to the next generation. Once they get to the United States, they have settled in poorer, rougher neighborhoods where gangs, drugs, and violence that go with them are prevalent. All this, and over 50% of this population, is living in poverty as we speak. This is a quote from Martha Sorensen. I'll give you a moment to read it. As we can see, this is an almost perfect storm for substance use disorder. We have trauma, we have poverty, and we have untreated mental health disorders. The likelihood that someone will turn to alcohol or drugs to quell their anxiety and PTSD at this point is probably very great. So let's look at how the drug use has evolved in the United States in the Somali community. When Somali refugees moved to the United States, their drug use was mostly khat, which was prevalent in Ethiopia. They didn't use a lot of alcohol because alcohol is forbidden by the Muslim faith. However, once Somalis got to America, they did start drinking. Amongst the younger people, marijuana is used heavily because it is a way to deal with their problems that isn't as bad as the harder drugs like Xanax and fentanyl. All of these drugs, however, are becoming more prevalent in the community, especially in the metro area. They are used to help with the stress of life, especially sexual assaults and deaths of friends in the community. This brings us to the worst part. All of these factors lead to the dark reality that if you are a Somali under 35, you are at least 2.5 times as likely to die from an overdose than the general population in Minnesota. And 2.5 times as likely underreported, as a lot of overdose deaths aren't marked as overdose deaths because the family is too ashamed of the stigma that would go with having a drug overdose in their family. All of this may seem dark, but there is hope and a vibrant recovery community growing within the Somali community. As you will see, Somali clan identity is a strength. The Somali people have kept a strong identity. This identity has allowed them to weather the storms of many wars and still maintain a strong community. This leads to a strong desire to help each other, and as we will see in a minute, this desire is creating powerful support systems from within the Somali recovery community. In addition, the social pressure from clan identity can be a motivational factor in efforts to change and bring honor back to their community. And clans mentality brings a built-in desire to help others in your clan. I interviewed 2 Somalis in recovery, and they both described how they started using and how it progressed. The first one was a woman, and she said that she was abused in Somalia as a small child and then moved to here, the United States, where she lived in a neighborhood that had a heavy drug and gang presence. She was teased there for being Somali and felt like she needed to fit in. She felt that the absence of a supportive family structure led to her eventual use. Her father was divorced when he came to the U.S., and he worked long hours. She described her addiction as being full of sexual abuse. She felt this abuse left her untrusting of men, and therefore she strongly suggested Somali women have women counselors. The second interviewee was a male who came from a middle-class family. He said that even though his family has a pretty good understanding of the disease of addiction, the Somali community as a whole does not, and there is an extreme amount of stigma around substance use disorder. I also found this to be true in all the documentaries that I found that were produced by the Somali community. And they all talked about the pervasive stigma around substance use disorder as a major barrier to finding and getting help. My interviewee also said that the Somali norms around gender roles made it so that some male Somalis would have a difficult time respecting female counselors. I asked them about the role religion played in both of their recoveries, and they both said that reconnecting with their Islamic roots was a key point in their recovery. Let's look at stigma in Somali culture. The fear of your children or relatives bringing shame in your family is so great that people with substance use disorder are shunned both in public and in their private homes. This leads many addicts in the Somali community to end up homeless and basically familyless. In addition, this leads to individuals fearing the stigma so much they do not seek help. Gender roles are very important in the Somali culture and can lead women to not trusting male counselors and males not respecting female counselors. Counseling schools that will improve outcomes in the Somali community include trauma-informed counseling, because the level of traumas within the Somali community are so great. Gender-appropriate counselors should be used to improve outcomes also, since there are culturally specific gender roles, and if you don't respect them, then we aren't doing our jobs as counselors. 3 treatment methods could help this population would be first, housing first. Since many of these people who suffer from substance abuse disorder have been ostracized from their community, getting them a roof over their head and some stability is going to be key to them being able to make the steps they need to move forward in their recovery. Then motivational interviewing will likely be a logical step to help them get past their beliefs around stigma and shame. And finally, peer support, especially by recovering members of their own community, will help them reconnect and overcome their isolation. Both of the individuals I interviewed go back to where they went to treatment to support other Somalis fresh in their recovery. I found 2 organizations that I really like that are helping the Somali community right now. One is Generation Hope. It's a peer-driven recovery service that offers support, meetings, and if you would like to learn more about them, there's a YouTube show called Sobriety Sundays with many episodes that has a lot of interviews with people from the Somali community. And that would be a wonderful resource to see how Somalis communicate with each other and allow you to improve your linguistic abilities with this community. The other one is Alliance Wellness. They have been providing substance use disorder treatment for many years to this specific community. Things that you should know about Somalia. A central tenet of Somali culture is generosity, and this translates into a sense of giving back after people in this culture have found recovery. This is helping to overcome the main roadblock to recovery in the Somali community, stigma. There's a growing movement in the community to combat stigma and shame around substance use disorder. Okay, let's bring it all together. Somalis came to the U.S. not necessarily looking for a better life, but rather running from a terrible one. They brought with them not only deeply ingrained trauma, but also a deep faith and vibrant giving culture. They have chosen to live in Minnesota because many of them believe that Minnesota shares that belief in generosity and personal faith. But the second generation of Somali in this state are often caught between the past and the present, trying to balance the pull of the old culture and to fit into the prevailing American culture. Unfortunately, for some, the stress of living in a new society, combined with the trauma in their past, has led them to substance use disorder. Somalis with substance use disorder have the same challenges as everyone's disease. The bad news that in our culture, in their culture, they will likely ostracize them due to the stigma attached to substance use in the Muslim faith. They will have little education about the services available to them, and they are at least 2.5 times more likely to die for an overdose. The good news is there's a growing movement within this culture trying to improve access to treatment and recovery services, as well as fight against the stigma that surrounds substance use disorder in this community. If you, as a counselor, encounter people in this community, I suggest you remember the things I've said about their faith and gender roles, as well as the need to address both trauma and stigma. As counselors, we should always remember to get to know each individual and not make cultural assumptions without a thorough understanding of each individual's personal cultural identity. Here's the bibliography page. These are some sites that you can set up if you want to learn more about the Somali culture. Here is another page. The one at the end there is a wonderful movie called The Forgotten Ones. I suggest you check it out. And then here's some more stuff you can check out. Thank you for coming to my video.